Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why saying something that is almost true can feel so different depending on the situation? Like, is it really false if it doesn't change anything? This is the big question a new study tackled. We all know language is messy. You might say it is about 20 degrees outside, or there were 100 people at the event, even if it is actually 19.5 degrees or 98 people. But when do we start calling those statements false? This research suggests it might have a lot to do with whether that little bit of inaccuracy actually caused something to happen or prevented something from happening. Is the catchy title of this paper. They wondered if we're more likely to judge a slightly inaccurate statement as false if that inaccuracy actually mattered in the real world. Think about it this way. If a suitcase is advertised as 22 inches and it is actually 22.4 inches, but it still fits in the overhead bin, does it really matter? Probably not. But what if that 0.4-inch difference meant it didn't fit? Then that tiny inaccuracy would suddenly matter a whole lot. So the researchers designed experiments to test this. In study 1, they presented people with scenarios. For example, a business owner needed to know if expenses were over a certain amount to decide on layoffs. An accountant reported the expenses as a nice round number, say $200,000. Now here's the kicker. In one version of the scenario, that rounded number, even if it wasn't perfectly exact, still led the owner to make the same decision about layoffs. The inaccuracy didn't change the outcome. This was the inconsequential condition. In the other version, the same rounded number, or a slightly different one, crossed that critical threshold. If the accountant had been perfectly precise, the owner would have made a different decision. That is when the inaccuracy was consequential. And guess what? People were more likely to say the accountant's report was false when that little bit of rounding actually changed whether people got laid off. It seems, even if you know the exact figure was close, if that closeness led to a different outcome, you are less likely to call the statement true. They took this even further in study 3. They had people play a betting game where they had to decide how much risk they were willing to take. A reporter would estimate the chance of winning, and based on that estimate and the decider's risk tolerance, a bet might be placed or not. The key was that the inaccuracy of the reporter's estimate could sometimes cause a bet to be placed when it shouldn't have been, or vice versa. Crucially, this game involved real money. So, if the reporter estimated a 55% chance of winning and the decider's threshold was 50%, the bet was placed. But if the actual chance of winning was only 48%, the reporter's estimate was inaccurate and that inaccuracy mattered. The decider could lose money because of that inaccurate report. What they discovered here was fascinating. Not only did consequences matter, but what kind of consequence mattered too. If the inaccuracy led to a bad outcome, like losing money, people were even more likely to judge the original statement as false. It seems we're particularly harsh when an approximation leads to something negative. However, if the inaccuracy led to a good outcome, like winning money, the effect of consequence was a bit smaller. They also looked at the magnitude, which was essentially how much money was at stake. Interestingly, in this study, they didn't find that the size of the consequence all by itself changed whether people judged the statement as false. But the badness of the outcome, the valence, definitely played a role. All of this points to a really complex way we handle truth. So what is the takeaway from all this? It seems that when we judge whether something is true or false, we're not just looking at the objective facts. We're also deeply considering the real-world impact, the consequences. If an approximation causes a significant change, especially a negative one, we're much more likely to label that approximation as false. It's like our brains have a built-in "so what?" test for truth. If an inaccurate statement doesn't change anything important, we might let it slide, calling it close enough, or even true for practical purposes. But if it messes things up, suddenly, strict accuracy becomes the rule. Of course, like any study, this one has its limits. The participants were mostly from the US and spoke English, so this might not apply everywhere, and they mostly focused on numerical inaccuracies, like with numbers. We don't know for sure if this consequence matters rule applies to other kinds of fuzzy language, like metaphors or exaggerations. Also, in study 3, the amount of money was limited, so it is possible a much bigger range of consequences might have shown different results for magnitude. This research really adds to the idea that what we consider true isn't always a simple yes or no based on facts alone. Things like context, intention, and yes, consequences all play a huge role in our everyday judgments of truth. It means when we hear or read information, we're constantly doing this subtle calculation. Does this approximation matter? And if it does, especially if it causes harm, we are much less forgiving. What is next? Future research could explore this further, perhaps by looking at different types of approximations beyond numbers, and by seeing if this effect is culturally universal. It is a reminder that communication is a dance, and understanding the steps, including the impact of our approximations, is key. So, what do you think? Does whether an approximation matters influence how you judge truth? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this dive into the psychology of truth fascinating, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science deep dives, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of the human mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.